What would you do if you boarded a plane as a stranger, only to find out your quiet resistance would rewrite the rules for millions of travelers forever? Sir, you need to move to the back. The flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin like a cold breeze. Passengers in nearby rows looked up. A few pulled out their phones, already recording. A Twitter live stream had just gone live. At Naomi. Blake, something's happening in first class on flight 447. The man in question didn't flinch. He sat in seat 1A, dressed in faded jeans and a grey hoodie. A worn leather briefcase rested quietly at his feet. He looked like someone who belonged in coach, maybe a construction foreman, maybe a warehouse supervisor, but certainly not the first-class type, or so it seemed. His name was Julian Carter, but to the flight crew that morning, he was just another man who didn't belong. "Sir," the flight attendant repeated, "this section is for premium passengers only." He finally looked up. Calm, unbothered, he simply said, "This is my seat." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you have your boarding pass?" He reached into his hoodie pocket and handed it to her. "Seat 1A. First class," it read. She blinked. There must be some mistake. Her name tag read Victoria Hensley. She'd been with Atlantic Airways for almost a decade. She prided herself on keeping order, but in her mind, a black man in worn sneakers didn't belong up here, no matter what his ticket said. "Let me see your ID," she insisted. Julian didn't protest. He handed it over without a word. By now, several passengers were watching, silently or through their screens. A woman in seat 3B, Dr. Grace Howard, frowned. Something felt off. Another crew member, a younger flight attendant named Amber, approached. "Is there a problem?" Victoria lowered her voice, but not enough. "This gentleman seems confused about his seat." "I think he booked coach." Julian leaned forward slightly. "Ma'am, I purchased this ticket 3 weeks ago. First class." Seat 1A. Victoria's fingers moved quickly across her tablet. She tapped, scrolled, frowned, then shook her head. "Sir, the system shows you bought an economy fare. You'll need to move." He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out a platinum airline card. 340,000 miles flown, he said. 6 consecutive years at platinum status. Victoria barely glanced at it. "Sir, anyone can buy those online these days. Now please gather your things and move to your assigned seat." Someone in row 2A, an older white man, leaned over. "Son, just do what she says. No need to cause a scene." "Exactly," Victoria echoed. "Maybe you're unfamiliar with how booking works." "These mistakes happen." The tone was clear, condescending, dismissive. Julian didn't move. Instead, he reached for his phone and started recording. "For the record," he said quietly, "this is Flight 447 to Chicago. It's 2:47 p.m. I'm being asked to leave my assigned first-class seat, despite showing my boarding pass ID and frequent flyer status." Captain Morgan Tate emerged from the cockpit. "What's going on here?" he asked, arms crossed. "Passenger refuses to move to his assigned seat in coach," Victoria replied quickly, not even mentioning the boarding pass Julian had shown her. Captain Tate scanned Julian from head to toe, hoodie, jeans, briefcase. His verdict was immediate. "Sir, I need you to cooperate," he said. "You're delaying the flight." Julian handed him everything again. Boarding pass, ID, loyalty card, first class. Seat 1A. Captain Tate didn't look. He just said, "Son, I've been flying for 15 years. I know when someone's trying to scam an upgrade." Victoria called security. More phones came out. Dr. Grace Howard hit record. A businessman in 4A looked up from his laptop. Even the live stream at Naomi Blake was hosting started trending. Julian remained calm. He wasn't trying to win a fight. He was documenting a pattern. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers approached Logan Pierce and Danielle Brooks. One veteran, one rookie. Logan asked, "Sir, may I see your documents?" Julian handed them over. Logan checked the documents thoroughly. He glanced up. "This boarding pass says first class," he said. Victoria stepped in. It must be fraudulent. These people know how to game the system. These people. The words dropped like a stone into silence. Julian didn't react, but Logan's face changed. He'd heard that phrase before too many times. He knew what it meant. "Sir," Logan said gently, "would you be willing to step off the plane for just a moment? We can sort this out at the gate." Julian nodded. He stood, quietly. As he picked up his briefcase, a text flashed across his screen. Dr. Howard caught a glimpse. Board meeting moved to conference room A, emergency session. Her brow furrowed. What kind of emergency board meeting would a coach passenger know about? As Julian stepped off the plane, the departure board changed. Flight 447. Delayed. 23 minutes. The terminal buzzed. Passengers whispered. Phones were still rolling. Julian Carter said almost nothing, but his presence was speaking volumes. No shouting, no threats, just calm truth. And as we'd all soon discover, he wasn't the one out of place. The terminal buzzed with the low hum of tension. Passengers murmured. Some openly filmed. Others watched from behind half-closed laptops and coffee cups. Julian Carter stood just outside Gate 23, still calm, still composed. Two security officers, Logan Pierce and Danielle Brooks, flanked him, not out of aggression, but protocol. He had offered no resistance. There was no reason for force. Inside the aircraft, things were different. Passengers whispered. "I saw his ID," one said. "He had all the right documents," said another. Dr. Grace Howard, seated in 3B, wasn't whispering. She was speaking clearly and directly to a flight attendant. "He showed you his boarding pass. You didn't even look at it." "Why?" Victoria Hensley narrowed her eyes. "Ma'am, this is a crew matter." "It's also a matter of fairness," Dr. Howard replied firmly. Back at the gate, Julian's briefcase sat neatly on a nearby bench. His phone buzzed. Another message. "Board assembled, awaiting your call." He closed the notification and looked up. The gate supervisor had just arrived. Sharon Blake-Tall, stern and seasoned. 12 years with Atlantic Airways. She'd worked her way up from baggage claim to gate operations manager. She walked with purpose. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked. Logan handed over Julian's documents. Passenger had a first-class boarding pass, ID matches, platinum status. No indication of fraud. Sharon flipped through the papers, slowly, thoroughly. She glanced at Julian, then back at the papers. "Mr. Carter, everything appears to be in order." Julian nodded. "Thank you. But," she continued, her voice tightening, "given the confusion and concern from our flight crew, I'm going to reseat you in economy just for this flight." There it was. The mask of politeness covering a policy of exclusion. Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't protest. He simply asked, "May I ask why?" "You've been argumentative," she replied. "I was sitting quietly," Julian said, "until I was asked to move." Sharon's expression hardened. "Arguing with me won't help. Your choices are coach or the next flight." Behind them, a small crowd had gathered. Passengers from the flight who'd already boarded now stood near the gate, watching, recording. Naomi Blake, still live-streaming, whispered to her audience of 1,500, "They've forced him off the plane, first-class ticket, multiple IDs, and they're treating him like a criminal." The comments flew in. "Sue them. This is 2025. How is this still happening? What's his name? He needs a lawyer." One teenage girl on TikTok was narrating the situation. A businessman was updating his LinkedIn feed in real time. "Liv from O'Hare." "Discrimination happening at Gate 23. Julian checked his watch. Not out of impatience, out of precision. It was time. He looked at Sharon. "May I speak with your district manager?" She laughed. "Sir, I'm the senior supervisor on duty. I have full authority." "I understand," Julian said gently. but I'd like to escalate this matter. You can file a complaint online like everyone else. Behind them, a woman stepped forward. Dr. Howard, excuse me, she said. I was on that plane. This man was respectful, quiet, and fully compliant. Why is he being treated this way? This is between the airline and Mr. Carter, Sharon replied, her tone clipped. I'm a paying customer too, Dr. Howard shot back. And I'm witnessing what looks like racial profiling. Another passenger, a businessman from first class, joined her. I saw everything. The crew never even looked at his documents. They assumed, period. Sharon glanced at her radio. It crackled. Supervisor Blake, please contact headquarters immediately. Priority 1. She stared at Julian, then at the boarding pass still in her hand. His watch buzzed. Another message. Legal and board present, on standby. He looked around at the gathering crowd. At the phones still recording, at the quiet rage in the room. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a card. A business card. He handed it to Sharon. Her face went pale. Julian Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Carter Holdings Group. Silence. Dr. Howard leaned in. Oh my God, she whispered. The businessman from earlier Googled him. His eyes widened. Holy. Carter Holdings just reported $2.4 billion in revenue last year. Naomi Blake's live stream audience doubled in 60 seconds. Wait, chat, are you seeing this? The man they kicked off the plane. He owns part of the airline. Sharon looked down at the card again, as if hoping it would change. It didn't. Julian took a breath. Calm, still respectful, but now speaking with weight. 6 months ago, Carter Holdings acquired a 23% stake in Atlantic Airways, he said. Gasps, mutters. Somebody whispered, no way. Even Captain Tate, back at the gate now, turned white as paper. That can't be true. I'd know about something like that. Julian met his eyes. Captain Tate, you've been with Atlantic for 15 years. Excellent safety record. I've read your file. Tate blinked. You reviewed my file? We review all key personnel files for companies we invest in. Standard due diligence. Victoria Hensley, who had stayed near the plane, visibly paled. She realized she hadn't just disrespected a passenger, she had humiliated one of the airline's largest shareholders. Julian opened his briefcase again and pulled out a second document. Fiscal year report. Atlantic Airways, $8.2 billion in revenue. Carter Holdings investment, $1.9 billion. Dr. Howard raised her phone again. This is a full-scale disaster. Julian continued. We book approximately 847 flights per year through Atlantic Airways. Annual travel spend, $1.2 million. Sharon's voice trembled. Mr. Carter, I didn't know. Of course not, he said gently. That's the problem. He pulled out a third item, a leather folder. Inside, proof of 6 years platinum status, 340,000 miles, 63 flights last year alone. Captain Tate looked at the papers like they might explode. We didn't verify, he admitted. Julian nodded. You didn't. Naomi's live stream hit 3,000 viewers. More passengers had gathered. Phones everywhere. Julian looked around. This isn't about me anymore, he said softly. What do you mean? Dr. Howard asked. He looked at the crowd. At this point, it's about making sure this never happens to anyone else. The gate area had transformed into something surreal. What was once a quiet boarding zone had now become a full-blown amphitheater. Passengers sat along the windows, leaned against pillars, or stood with their phones up filming. The screens glowed. Comments poured in. Atlantic Airways discrimination was trending. At the center of it all stood Julian Carter, calm, precise, composed. He opened his briefcase one more time. This, he said, is a stock ownership certificate. He held up a document with official seals and multiple signatures. It glinted slightly under the terminal lights. 6 months ago, Carter Holdings acquired a 23% stake in Atlantic Airways. That makes us the second largest shareholder in this airline. The reaction was instant. People gasped. One woman dropped her coffee. Someone muttered, "No way." The man from 4A said it louder. "You're telling me they kicked their own boss off the plane?" Julian turned toward Captain Morgan Tate, who looked like the floor had vanished beneath him. "I reviewed your personnel file, Captain," Julian said, not with anger, but clarity. "Your flight hours, incident history, performance reviews. We analyze all executive and safety-critical staff in our portfolio." Tate didn't reply. He couldn't. Victoria Hensley, the flight attendant who had started this chain of events, was still standing off to the side, motionless. Her face was drained of color. She understood now. She had humiliated a man who owned the company she worked for. Not figuratively, literally. "Miss Carter," a voice came from behind the crowd. It was Sharon Blake, the gate supervisor. Her radio buzzed again. She didn't even raise it to her ear. "Headquarters is asking me to put you on the phone with our CEO, Margaret Green," she said. "Right now." Julian nodded. "Put it on speaker." Sharon hesitated, then hit the button. "Ms. Green, this is Supervisor Blake. I have Mr. Carter with me." There was a pause on the other end. Then a sharp, professional voice cut through. "Julian, please tell me this is a misunderstanding." Julian glanced around. All eyes were on him. Every phone was recording. "I'm afraid it's not, Margaret," he said. "I was removed from my paid first-class seat. Despite showing a valid boarding pass, government ID, and platinum frequent flyer status." There was silence. Then Margaret Green, CEO of Atlantic Airways, spoke again, but her voice had shifted. Urgent. Controlled panic. "Is this being recorded?" Julian raised his phone. "I'd say several thousand people are watching right now." Margaret let out a breath that might have been a curse. "Okay, Julian. What do you need?" Julian didn't hesitate. "First, I need your flight crew to understand that they've created a legal and public relations crisis." Margaret didn't interrupt. "Second," he continued, "I need immediate corrective action visible, measurable, and public. And third," Julian looked out over the crowd, "I need you to understand. This isn't about me. It's about every person who's ever been treated like they don't belong." He let that sit. Let it echo in the quiet fury of the terminal. Naomi Blake's live stream count hit 4,200. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Julian pulled out one final document. "This," he said, "is a grant donation form." He held it up. Last year, the Carter Foundation donated $500,000 to Atlantic Airways to fund diversity and inclusion training for your crew. The crowd rippled with gasps. Even Sharon blinked in disbelief. "I tried to help this airline grow," Julian said. "Not just financially, but ethically. I believed we could lead the industry." He looked directly at Victoria. "And today, I experienced exactly why that help was needed in the first place." Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Julian turned back toward the phone. "Margaret," he said calmly, "you now have a choice. Handle this correctly or watch it spiral beyond your control." Margaret's voice returned. "Lower now, more careful. You have full authority, Julian. Whatever you decide, we'll back it. Just, please, help us fix this." He nodded once. "I'll be in touch with formal recommendations by this evening." He ended the call. Silence settled again, heavy, but not empty. Something in the air had changed. The crowd of 50 now stared at Julian, not as a passenger, but as a man who had just stopped time. The live stream chat exploded. He donated to help them, and they kicked him off? This man is grace under pressure. Black excellence. Right here. Best twist since a courtroom drama. "I want to fly Carter Air." Julian took one last look around. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice clear, "I'm sorry for the delay. But sometimes, delays serve a greater purpose." Then he looked at Sharon. Shall we go inside now? She nodded slowly. They disappeared into a private gate meeting room. But for the people still watching, both in person and online, the message was already received. This wasn't just about one flight. This was about all of them. Inside Conference Room A at Atlantic Airways headquarters, things had gone from bad to historic. The mahogany table, usually used for quarterly budget reviews, was now surrounded by chaos in tailored suits. 8 board members, legal counsel, PR executives, and Margaret Green, CEO of the airline, all sat in stunned silence. On the giant screen at the front of the room, Julian Carter, standing in gate 23 with a crowd behind him, phones still out, streams still running. This was no longer a private crisis, it had become a public reckoning. "Julian," Margaret said into the microphone, "you have the floor." Julian adjusted the camera so that both he and the waiting passengers behind him could be seen. No backroom deals, no closed-door compromises, everything was going to be transparent. "Thank you, Margaret," he began. "Before we talk about resolution, your board needs to understand the scope of what happened." He turned to the side and gestured toward Victoria Hensley, who now stood stiffly near the podium. "Miss Hensley, can you repeat what you first said to me when I boarded?" Victoria's voice was faint. "I said, this section is for premium passengers only. And when I showed you my platinum status card, you said, anyone can buy those online," she admitted. A murmur ran through the boardroom. One of the board members, David Kim, leaned forward. "Miss Hensley, what made you assume Mr. Carter's documents were fraudulent?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Victoria didn't answer. "She didn't need to." Julian stepped in. "Let me save her the discomfort," he said, not cruelly. "She assumed I didn't belong because I'm a black man in casual clothes." No one denied it. No one could. Margaret Green rubbed her temples. "Julian, what are your immediate demands?" Julian pulled out his tablet and connected it wirelessly to the boardroom feed. Within seconds, the screen shifted to a new presentation, clean, bold, unrelenting. Slide 1. Customer satisfaction score, 3.25. Industry average, 3.8. Slide 2. Discrimination complaints, 147. Filed in 2024, 43% higher than industry average. Gasps in the boardroom. Slide 3. Carter Holdings. Travel spending. Atlantic Airways, $1.2 million year. American Airlines, $800,000. Delta, $650,000. The implication was clear. You're losing more than a PR battle. You're risking your biggest corporate clients. Julian paused. "Let me be clear. Carter Holdings is not threatening. We're evaluating our vendor partnerships for alignment with our values. That process starts today." Margaret sat upright. "Julian, what does resolution look like to you?" Julian didn't hesitate. He had been preparing for this his entire life. Julian's 5 demands: immediate termination. All personnel directly involved in discriminatory actions, specifically Victoria Hensley and Captain Morgan Tate, must be terminated within 24 hours. Victoria looked like she'd been struck. Captain Tate closed his eyes. Bias training. 30-day deadline. Comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff. Not a one-time PowerPoint, real training. Executed within 30 days. Anonymous reporting system. Managed by a third-party agency. Accessible by staff and passengers. Operational within 72 hours. Diversity Inclusion Fund. $500,000 allocated to internal inclusion initiatives, reviewed by an independent committee. Public apology. From the airline. Acknowledging systemic failures, not just one mistake, but a culture that made this possible. The boardroom was silent. Finally, Margaret Green spoke. "Julian, a public apology could expose us to legal risk." "Margaret," Julian interrupted, "you already have legal risk." He raised his phone. On screen, the hashtag #dignity in the skies now had over 6,000 tweets. Your stock has dropped 2.1% in 2 hours. 4,000 people are watching this live. That number grows every minute. This isn't about damage control anymore. It's about leadership. She turned to legal counsel, who whispered rapidly in her ear. After a long pause, she turned back. All conditions accepted. The passengers in the terminal broke into applause. Naomi Blake's stream exploded with heart emojis, clapping gifs, and stunned comments. He did it. Real-time justice. This is how you make change. But Julian wasn't done. There's one final item, he said. Everyone leaned in. The final demand, executive accountability. Starting this quarter, Julian said firmly, 20% of all executive bonuses at Atlantic Airways will be tied to measurable improvement in diversity outcomes evaluated quarterly and publicly reported. The boardroom froze. Even Margaret looked stunned. You want to tie our pay? To fairness, Julian finished. Yes. The room was dead silent. Then one by one, board members nodded. Slowly. Then with growing certainty, agreed. Margaret looked straight into the camera. You'll have the signed implementation timeline within 4 hours. Julian gave a rare smile. Make it 2. He ended the call. The camera pulled back slightly. Behind him, the gate had gone still. Dozens of passengers stood not in line, but in solidarity. Dr. Grace Howard stepped forward. Mr. Carter, what happens now? Julian picked up his briefcase, straightened his posture, and said simply, Now, we get these people to Chicago, and we make sure the next passenger who looks like me or doesn't get treated with the same dignity we all deserve. The moment Julian Carter ended the call, a ripple of movement swept through Gate 23. Janet Blake, the gate supervisor, snapped out of her stunned silence and grabbed her radio. Begin immediate reassignment of crew for Flight 447, she said. Escort Hensley and Captain Tate to holding. Inform legal. Passengers blinked. Victoria Hensley was being led away, her shoulders hunched, eyes downcast. Captain Morgan Tate followed shortly after, escorted by airport operations. No handcuffs, just consequence. And then, something extraordinary happened. A new crew began arriving within 15 minutes. Professional. Diverse. Calm. Mr. Carter, one of them said, we'd be honored to serve you this evening. Julian simply nodded. Let's make this flight one to remember for the right reasons. Back inside Atlantic Airways headquarters, emails were flying faster than jets. Margaret Green, the CEO, had already issued internal memos titled Dignity in the Skies, Immediate Action Protocol, Emergency Implementation Timeline, 72 hours. Julian's 5 demands had gone into effect in real time. Hour 1. Terminations. Finalized. Personnel files were reviewed. Performance records were re-examined. Victoria Hensley and Captain Tate were terminated with cause. Sharon Blake, the gate supervisor who had initially resisted accountability, was demoted to training coordinator with a condition. She would undergo sensitivity training and bias counseling. Atlantic Airways didn't try to sweep things under the rug. They documented it publicly, and the world saw it. Hour 8. Public statement released. At 6:00 a.m. the following morning, Atlantic Airways posted an open letter on their website and every major news outlet. To our passengers, our employees, and our community. What happened to Mr. Julian Carter on Flight 447 was wrong. It reflected assumptions, systems, and behaviors that do not represent who we strive to be. We are no longer making statements. We are making change. Margaret Green, CEO, Atlantic Airways. The statement went viral. Even major competitors retweeted it, some with admiration, some with caution. The New York Times ran the headline, Airline makes historic shift after passenger stands up to discrimination. Hour 24, reporting system goes live. the new anonymous discrimination reporting portal launched across all Atlantic Airways platforms. Passengers and employees could now submit reports without fear of retaliation, each one reviewed by a third-party civil rights firm. Within 6 hours, 12 reports were already under investigation. Transparency wasn't a promise anymore. It was policy. Hour 48. New training begins. Julian's second demand reel, effective anti-bias training, kicked off. Atlantic Airways scrapped its old checkbox compliance modules and partnered with a social justice nonprofit. Their curriculum included real-life case studies, including Julian's own experience, scenario-based role-plays with actors of diverse backgrounds, required reflection journals for all customer-facing staff. Training was mandatory for all employees within 30 days, but over 1,000 workers voluntarily enrolled on day 1. Hour 72. The results. Start to show flight. 447 finally took off, nearly 3 hours late, but with a completely different crew and a completely changed atmosphere. Julian sat quietly in seat 1A. Next to him in 1B was Dr. Grace Howard, the woman who had spoken up first during the confrontation. She turned and smiled. "You started a movement," she said. Julian shook his head. "We all did." He opened his laptop not to check work emails, but to review something far more important: the portal dashboard. Real-time metrics showed 27 incidents logged, 9 under active review, 3 already resolved with corrective action. That wasn't just reform, that was functioning accountability. Meanwhile, across the industry, other transportation companies were watching. Delta issued a statement saying they were reviewing their own training programs. American Airlines announced a partnership with the same non-profit Atlantic had used. Greyhound and Amtrak launched pilot versions of anonymous reporting tools. The ripple effect had begun. And Julian? He was watching all of it. Not with pride, with responsibility. The human side of victory. In his inbox that evening was a letter from a 28-year-old flight attendant named Kevin, based in Atlanta. "Mr. Carter, I'm a gay man and a mixed-race crew member. I've been on the edge of quitting this job for years because of what I've seen and felt. Your courage gave me hope. More than that, it gave me proof. Thank you." Another letter came from a retired pilot. "When I first read about you, I was skeptical. Then I watched the stream, and I cried. Because I remembered every time I stayed quiet when I shouldn't have." Julian saved both letters in a folder marked "Evidence of Change." Back at headquarters, Margaret Green entered her own boardroom, facing her executive team. "From this day forward," she said, "we lead with integrity, or we lose our right to lead." Every executive had received revised compensation plans that week. 20% of their annual bonus now depended on diversity outcomes and passenger equality metrics. No one objected. Some, in fact, stood and applauded. Because change wasn't hypothetical anymore, it was measurable. It was visible. It was real. Closing the flight back on board Flight 447 as the plane descended toward Chicago, Julian stared out the window. The city lights shimmered like a promise. Next to him, Dr. Howard leaned closer. "Mr. Carter, how do you stay so calm in the face of injustice?" Julian turned and smiled for the first time that day. "Anger is temporary," he said. "But systems change. That's permanent." 71 hours after Flight 447 had been grounded for what began as a seat confusion, the world no longer saw it as a flight delay. They saw it for what it truly was, a system awakening. At the Carter Holdings headquarters in downtown Chicago, Julian Carter sat at his desk, the city skyline gleaming behind him. The mahogany surface in front of him was neatly organized: reports, legal updates, media coverage, and a growing stack of letters. His assistant, Maria Santos, entered the room holding a thick folder. "Everything's been implemented, Mr. Carter," she said. "Terminations were executed yesterday." "New crew training launched this morning. The anonymous reporting system went live at 6 o'clock a.m. Julian nodded. She added, "And you've got 137 letters. From passengers, airline employees, even people from outside the aviation industry." He looked up. "How many are handwritten?" "Almost a third," Maria smiled. Julian opened the first envelope. A short note from a young woman named Danielle, a gate agent from Houston. "Mr. Carter, I've watched what you did. I used to be afraid to speak up. Now I'm not, thank you." Another came from Kevin Whitaker, a former passenger. "I filed a discrimination complaint last year. Nothing happened. But now your system gave me a call within 12 hours. I finally feel seen." This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about restoration. The industry responds. The headlines came fast. Delta launches bias reporting portal after Carter protocol success. The Wall Street Journal. Amtrak names first chief diversity officer. NPR. Greyhound commits to industry-wide bias training. USA. Today. Julian didn't reach out to them. They reached out to him. Some wanted to license the training curriculum developed in partnership with Carter Holdings and the non-profit firm Julian had worked with. Others simply wanted to learn. "I've never seen this much alignment across transportation sectors," said Dr. Grace Howard, the physician from Seat 3B who had spoken out during the flight. Everyone suddenly realized change was overdue. They just needed a roadmap. And now they had one. It was being called the Carter Protocol. The Carter Protocol, a blueprint for change. The core elements were simple but powerful. Real-time reporting, anonymous systems monitored by third-party civil rights firms. Rapid response. Every report required an initial review within 24 hours. Resolution plan within 72. Public accountability. Quarterly, public summaries of incidents, outcomes, and improvements. Bias training that works. Not just videos, not just checklists. Real conversations, real consequences, tying leadership, pay to inclusion metrics. If the culture doesn't change, the bonuses don't come. This wasn't about punishment, it was about structure, and it was catching on. Federal eyes watching. By week 2, the U.S. Department of Transportation had taken notice. Secretary Michael Rodriguez, no relation to the former captain, called Julian personally. "Mr. Carter," he said, "your Atlantic Airways incident has created the political momentum we needed. We're drafting federal guidelines now. We'd like you to consult." Julian didn't hesitate. He didn't need more power. He wanted more prevention. Stories that sparked systems. In the weeks that followed, dozens of stories poured in. One came from Jasmine Carter, a young MBA graduate from Atlanta. "I had a nearly identical experience with another airline. I thought I had to accept it. But seeing you stand your ground? I'm now working with the ACLU to document systemic bias across airlines." Julian saved her letter separately. It would become part of a broader class action initiative, not to attack, but to elevate. To bring everyone up, even former employees who had failed. Redemption in real time. 2 weeks after the flight, Julian received an email that made him stop and stare. From Victoria. Hensley@airmail.com. Subject, "Thank you, Mr. Carter, I was wrong. I let my assumptions lead the way. I made a momentary judgment that became a national headline. But instead of destroying me, your response educated me. I've enrolled in the same training you recommended. I've volunteered for outreach programs in my community. Thank you for responding with grace. You didn't just change the airline, you changed me." Julian leaned back in his chair. He didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed. The numbers don't lie. Carter Holdings began tracking national data. Within 30 days, airline discrimination complaints dropped 29%. Customer satisfaction in first and business class rose 11%. Employee-reported incidents of bias were 3x higher. Not because it got worse, but because people finally felt safe reporting. Within 60 days, 17 transportation companies adopted the Carter Protocol, 6 licensed the full training program, 4 began tying executive compensation to diversity goals. Julian didn't need headlines. He had spreadsheets. And the numbers were changing. The real victory. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was what happened one quiet Tuesday when Julian boarded another flight. This time, no live stream, no viral drama. No chaos. Just a flight attendant, a young black man named David, who looked him in the eye and said, "Mr. Carter, it's an honor to have you on board."
"You've made our airline better," Julian nodded. "You're the proof." 2 years had passed since that unforgettable day at Gate 23. The world had changed in small but measurable ways. Discrimination complaints across major U.S. airlines had dropped 71%. 12 transportation companies had adopted independent bias reporting systems. Thousands of employees, from pilots to bus drivers, had completed bias recognition training. But tonight wasn't about data. Tonight was about story. At the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, the auditorium was packed. The Transportation Equality Summit had drawn a full crowd, 800 people in person, tens of thousands online. Airline executives sat alongside civil rights lawyers, union reps, educators, and activists. At the front stood a polished wooden podium. Behind it, a giant screen read, "Keynote Address, Julian Carter, CEO, Carter Holdings." A voice that carried. Julian stepped up to the microphone, not in a tailored suit, but in the same grey hoodie and jeans he had worn on Flight 447. The crowd rose in a standing ovation before he even spoke. He waited, then quietly, calmly. Change doesn't always require protests. It doesn't require lawsuits, or marches, or megaphones. Sometimes, all it takes is a boarding pass, a camera, and the will to not move. There was a pause, then he smiled. "You know what I mean." The power of documentation. Julian clicked to his first slide. It was simple. A line graph showing discrimination complaints from 2024 to 2026. The line curved downward like a wave breaking into calm. "We didn't solve bias," he said. "But we made it reportable. We made it undeniable. And that changed everything." He clicked to the next slide. Faces, names, stories. Employees who had spoken up and been heard. Passengers who had submitted reports and seen change. Supervisors who had retrained and returned better. "This isn't just about air travel," he said. "This is about dignity in every seat, every row, every terminal, no matter the color of your skin or the cost of your ticket." A familiar face, steps forward. When the speech ended, the crowd rose again. But one woman stayed seated. She looked different than 2 years ago, hair pulled back. No uniform, no badge, just quiet humility and a notepad in her lap. When the QA session began, she raised her hand. A staff member passed her the microphone. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Carter, I'm Sarah Hensley. I was the flight attendant on Flight 447. The room froze. People turned. Whispers spread. Julian didn't flinch. He looked directly at her. "Miss Hensley, thank you for being here." She stood slowly, hands slightly shaking. "I wanted to publicly apologize. Again. But more importantly, I wanted to say thank you, because your response didn't just change the airline. It changed me." There wasn't a dry eye in the front row. Redemption is possible. Sarah continued. "After I was terminated, I went through a spiral of shame, but I didn't disappear. I enrolled in a bias training program voluntarily. I became certified, and I now work as a diversity consultant teaching others to recognize the mistake I once made in real time." She paused, eyes glistening. "You didn't humiliate me. You didn't cancel me. You educated me by example." and that gave me the courage to grow. The crowd erupted in applause, not loud and explosive, but warm, genuine. Julian walked down from the stage and shook her hand. "Sarah," he said, "your courage in showing up today, that's the kind of change no policy can mandate." The next wave of impact. After the keynote, Julian met with a group of transportation CEOs in a private session. Several were implementing the Carter Protocol. One was expanding it into their hospitality division. Another was pushing for international adoption. A lawyer from the ACLU approached him with a new case, a black family removed from a first-class cabin again, but this time they had video. They had names, and they had legal backing within hours, thanks to the new reporting system inspired by Gate 23. Beyond transportation, a woman named Dr. Rachel Lynn, head of emergency medicine at Northwestern Memorial, also spoke with Julian. "We've adopted your anonymous system in our hospital. Staff can now report patient discrimination, doctor bias, even racial microaggressions with protection. We call it the Carter Channel." Julian smiled. "That's a powerful name," she laughed. "We even trained our AI systems to analyze patterns of discrimination in medical notes. Real-time alerts. Systemic data." One more letter. Back in Chicago, Julian returned to his office the next day. On his desk was a small white envelope with a handwritten note inside. It was from Angela Thompson, the young black woman who had once written him about a discriminatory experience on United Airlines. "Mr. Carter, because of your example, I joined a legal support team. We just settled a case involving 63 passengers and one discriminatory policy. The airline now trains every employee using a system based on your story. We're calling it the Flight 447 Standard." Julian placed the letter in a box marked "Legacy in Progress." 3 months had passed since Julian Carter delivered his powerful keynote at the National Civil Rights Museum. The ripples from that speech were still expanding, but this time the next wave wasn't coming from him. It was coming from someone who once believed she had no voice. Her name was Angela Thompson. A familiar story, silenced too soon. Angela was 27, a recent MBA graduate from Detroit. 1 month before Julian's infamous Flight 447, she boarded a United Airlines flight from Newark to Houston. She had dressed professionally, arrived early, smiled politely. Her seat was in first class, paid with her own money after her first big contract win, but none of that mattered. The flight attendant took one look at her, then asked, "Are you sure you're in the right section?" Angela had smiled, assuming it was a mistake. But the tone sharpened. "We need to check with the gate. Wait here." Passengers around her whispered. Some rolled their eyes. No one said a word. Within minutes, she was escorted to a seat in economy until they could sort it out. No explanation. No apology. Just quiet shame. And like so many before her, she said nothing. She filed a complaint. It went unanswered. She wrote an email. It bounced. Then she buried the incident and told herself it's not worth the fight. Until she saw Julian Carter's face. The power of seeing someone stand up. Angela hadn't even followed aviation news. But when Julian's live stream appeared on her Twitter feed, something in her clicked. Here was a man who didn't yell, didn't argue, he documented, he stood firm. He changed everything, and he looked like her. For the first time in her life, Angela didn't feel isolated. She felt represented, and then she felt ready. From silence to strategy, Angela started small. She posted her story on LinkedIn, tagging "Had Dignity in the Skies" and Julian Carter. Within hours, she received 400 reactions, 37 private messages, and one phone call that changed her path. "Angela, this is Margaret Green from Atlantic Airways. I saw your post. Would you consider consulting with our inclusion team?" But Angela wasn't ready to consult. She was ready to lead. Instead,
she contacted a civil rights attorney who had spoken at one of Julian's summits. Together, they began gathering data. They reached out to former flight attendants, gate agents, and passengers. What they found shocked them. Over 60 similar cases from 5 major airlines, nearly all involved black passengers, often women, being moved without cause. Only 7% of the complaints had received a meaningful response. Many of the perpetrators had repeat behavior patterns, never addressed. Angela didn't want to go viral. She wanted systemic change, and she was ready to fight for it. The class action that rocked the industry. 6 weeks later, Angela stood on the courthouse steps in D.C., flanked by 12 other passengers and 2 law firms. They filed a class action lawsuit against 3 major airlines, alleging systemic discrimination, negligence in complaint response, and internal cultures that tolerated racial bias. The media showed up. So did the Department of Transportation. Julian Carter? He didn't show up for cameras. But behind the scenes, his foundation provided the funding for legal strategy, expert witnesses, and tech systems to track complaint data across carriers. Angela's team used the Carter Protocol as their model. In court documents, it was cited 17 times. A conversation between 2 leaders. One night, as the case picked up national attention, Angela received a private video call from Julian. He greeted her with his signature calm. "Angela," he said, "your story reminded me why I did all this in the first place." She smiled. "I'm just following your playbook." "No," Julian replied. "You're writing the next chapter." They spoke for over an hour, not about lawsuits or headlines, but about legacy. Angela said something that stuck with Julian long after the call ended. "You proved we can change systems. I want to prove we can protect them." Impact in motion. By the time Angela's case entered its 2nd month, one airline settled, agreeing to pay $4.2 million and adopt a variant of the Carter Protocol. Another airline fired 2 senior managers after internal documents showed they had ignored dozens of discrimination complaints. The final airline resisted until pressure from public shareholders forced them into negotiation. And that was just the legal side. Culturally, Angela became a new symbol. She wasn't a billionaire, she wasn't a CEO. She was a regular woman who had said, "Enough. A new chapter begins." At the next Carter Foundation Summit, held in Chicago, Angela was the closing speaker. She didn't talk about the lawsuit. She talked about her younger self. "I used to think that staying quiet was safer. But the truth is, silence doesn't protect you. It only protects the system that mistreats you." She ended with one final call to action. Don't wait for someone like Julian Carter to show up. Be the one who documents, who speaks, who acts. Because when you do, you don't just reclaim your seat, you reclaim your worth. The crowd gave her the longest standing ovation of the summit. Julian, seated in the front row, rose last but clapped hardest. Because for him, this wasn't just about one incident. It was about building an army of voices that would never be silenced again. 2 years after Julian Carter refused to leave seat 1A, the ripple he started finally reached Washington, D.C. This time, it didn't come from live streams. It came from federal legislation. In a press conference held at the Department of Transportation, U.S., Secretary Michael Rodriguez stood at the podium flanked by senators, civil rights attorneys, and representatives from transportation unions. Behind him, a large digital sign read, "Dignity in Transportation Act, 2027. Subtitle, "The Atlantic Airways Rules." The name was no accident, from one gate to the entire nation. 2 years ago, Secretary Rodriguez began, a man named Julian Carter showed the country what quiet power looks like. He paused. He didn't shout. He didn't sue on impulse. He documented. He stood firm. He asked the right questions, and in doing so, he helped us all see what needed to change. Then he outlined the new rules federal mandates based directly on what Julian and Angela Thompson had built through the Carter Protocol. The Atlantic Airways rules include mandatory bias reporting systems. All transportation providers, airlines, buses, trains, must implement anonymous reporting platforms monitored by certified third-party firms. 24-hour response requirement. All discrimination-related complaints must be acknowledged within 24 hours and resolved or escalated within 5 business days. Bias training. Across the industry. Every customer-facing employee is required to complete renewable training every 18 months, approved by the Department of Transportation. Public quarterly transparency reports. Companies must publish data on complaints, outcomes, and improvements accessible to the public. Penalties for non-compliance. Failure to meet these standards results in fines up to $500,000 per incident and possible license review. A movement becomes policy. CNN called it the most sweeping federal anti-discrimination initiative in U.S. transportation since the Civil Rights Act. Julian didn't attend the press event. He was watching from his office in Chicago, coffee in hand, live stream playing on mute. His assistant, Maria, entered quietly. "They're calling it the Atlantic Airways rules," she said, smiling. Julian didn't say anything at first, then finally, softly, "Good. That means the next time someone like me gets told to move to the back, the law moves with them." The Carter Foundation expands its reach. Alongside the federal reforms, the Carter Foundation launched a new initiative, TEN Transportation Equality Network. With seed funding from Carter Holdings and 4 other corporate allies, TEN was designed to offer legal representation to passengers facing discrimination, provide pro bono training to small regional carriers that lacked resources, maintain a centralized national database of confirmed bias complaints, work with media to track and publicize stories of successful reform. Within the first 90 days, TEN had supported 43 cases across 5 transportation sectors. They weren't looking for headlines. They were building infrastructure for dignity. Impact in real time. One of the first recipients of TEN support was Nia Richardson, a black mother of 2 from Phoenix. She and her children had been removed from a bus after a white passenger claimed they were too loud. No investigation. No refund. Just humiliation. When TEN stepped in, the bus company not only issued a formal apology, they implemented Carter-style training across their entire Southwest fleet. Nia later wrote to Julian, "I didn't have a platform, I didn't have followers. But because of what you started, I had protection." Legacy in motion. By mid-2027, the term Carter complaint had entered the industry lexicon, not as an insult, as a standard. It meant, this one's serious, this one's real, handle it right. Airlines redesigned their incident tracking systems. Rideshare companies launched in-app discrimination alerts. Even airport police underwent bias de-escalation training using materials based on Flight 447. Julian's quiet response. When asked by the New York Times how he felt about being the namesake of a national law, Julian simply said, "This was never about fame. It was about function. I just didn't want the next person to need a camera crew to be treated with respect." From tragedy to training. Back in Memphis, the National Civil Rights Museum created a permanent exhibit titled "The Flight That Changed Policy, Gate 23 and the Power of Resistance." It featured Julian's original boarding pass, donated anonymously, the phone used by Naomi Blake to live stream the incident, audio recordings from the courtroom of Angela Thompson's landmark settlement, a real-time display of current Carter Protocol complaint stats from across the country. School groups walked through daily. One young girl, about 10 years old, stood beneath the video loop of Julian refusing to move. She turned to her teacher and whispered, "He didn't even raise his voice." And they listened. The teacher smiled.
That's what leadership looks like. Julian's reflection. That evening, Julian took a walk through downtown Chicago. No cameras.
No staff. Just a man thinking about how much had changed since that moment on Flight 447. He passed a billboard advertising a regional airline. Below it, in fine print, proud to follow the Atlantic Airways rules. Every flight, every passenger. Julian stopped and looked up at it. He didn't smile out of ego. He smiled because for the first time in a long time, the system wasn't just reacting, it was remembering. And that meant the work was finally sticking. It had been exactly 2 years since Julian Carter boarded Atlantic Airways Flight 447 and was told calmly, cruelly, that he didn't belong in first class. Now, he stood once again at Gate 23, but this time, no one looked at him twice. No one questioned his boarding pass. No one glanced at his hoodie and wondered, what's he doing up there? Because this time, the system remembered, and different kind of welcome. Good afternoon, Mr. Carter. The gate agent smiled. Her badge read Danielle Brooks, a name Julian recognized from the early incident reports. She'd gone through the Carter Foundation's first wave of equity training. We're honored to have you flying with us today, she added. Would you like pre-boarding? Julian shook his head. I'm okay waiting. Danielle nodded. Then I'll see you on board. And thank you, Thar, for everything. He offered a quiet smile. In that moment, it wasn't about gratitude. It was about proof. Proof that change had taken root and wasn't just decoration. Flight 447, once again. Boarding was seamless. No stares. No whispers. Just the kind of normalcy every traveler deserves. Julian took his seat A, of course. Next to him in 1B sat a middle-aged white man reading a book titled Equity by Design. He looked over. You, Julian Carter? I am. I work in education policy, the man said. We studied your work in a training last month. Julian nodded. How's it going? The man smiled. Messy, but real. Julian chuckled. That's the best kind of progress, the cabin that had changed. As the rest of the passengers boarded, Julian noticed something remarkable. A young Latina mother settled into seat 3A, with her baby no glances, no tension. A Sikh man wearing a turban was respectfully greeted and offered assistance with his carry-on. A gay black couple laughed softly in seats 4C and 4D, no awkward silence from neighbors. Every row told a different story. But none of them involved shame. None of them involved erasure. And none of them involved the silent question, do you belong here? Because now, everyone did. The flight attendant who knew the history. Midway through the flight, a young black flight attendant approached. Mr. Carter, he said quietly, my name is David. I just wanted to say thank you. Julian looked up. Thank you for what? David smiled. I used to work the ground crew. I watched your story in real time. It taught me how to speak up and how to stay employed while doing it. Julian grinned. Those are both important, David added. I'm now helping train new crew members. Your case is part of the onboarding materials. Julian blinked. That hit different. Not because it was about him, but because it was about institutional memory. The system wasn't just functioning, it was teaching. The return to Chicago. As the plane began its descent, Julian opened his laptop. He wasn't preparing for a business meeting. He was writing a note. To a new intern at the Carter Foundation who had emailed the night before. How do I know if the work we're doing matters? Julian typed, if someone walks onto a plane today and feels safe, or seen, or simply left alone in peace, then yes, the work matters. He hit send just as the wheels touched down. Flight 447 had arrived. But its journey was far from over. One last visit. After landing, Julian took a slight detour. Instead of heading to his car, he walked to an exhibit that had opened just weeks earlier at Chicago O'Hare, Gate 23, where change took off. Inside were items donated anonymously, a replica of Julian's boarding pass, A mounted screenshot of Naomi Blake's live stream, the original slide deck from the Transportation Equality Summit. A quote etched in metal. Anger is temporary. Systems change is permanent. Beneath it, visitors had pinned notes. I spoke up on a train last month because of you. I didn't know people cared until I saw your flight. Now, I report. Now, I stand. Julian read them all. Quietly, without recognition, but with full understanding. Closing message to the world. 2 weeks later, Julian appeared in a new video published by the Carter Foundation titled, "You Don't Have to Be a CEO to Make Change." Standing in front of a blank backdrop, Julian looked into the lens. His voice, as always, was calm. When they told me to move, I could have complied. I could have made a scene. Instead, I told the truth, documented it, and shared it. And what happened next wasn't about me. It was about the thousands of people who had no platform, who had never been believed, who finally saw someone push back with grace and facts and strength. So if you ever find yourself wondering, do I matter? Will anyone care? Let me answer you now. Yes, you matter. Yes, they will care. And sometimes, one moment of courage becomes a blueprint for justice. The screen faded to black. A final line appeared, inspired by Flight 447, built for everyone. In a world where silence often follows injustice, Julian Carter's story reminds us that change doesn't always come from shouting. It comes from standing firm, documenting truth, and insisting on dignity for all. He didn't raise his voice or seek revenge. Instead, he used calm, clarity, and the power of accountability to transform an entire industry. For older Americans who have lived through decades of social struggle, this story is a quiet affirmation that the work isn't done, but it's never in vain. One man, wrongly judged for how he looked, chose not to be bitter but to build, and through that choice he created systems to protect others who may never have the chance to fight back. The lesson is clear. When we witness injustice, we have a choice. We can look away, or we can record, report, and reform. True progress isn't about spotlight moments, it's about what we do after the cameras stop rolling. Because dignity isn't just owed to the powerful, it belongs to everyone in every seat, on every flight, in every room, and sometimes the most powerful change begins when someone simply refuses to move.